right, here we are. We are doing a time lapse of something. So I say of something because I have not painted it yet. So we're doing some weird time travel. You're hearing the narration and seeing the time lapse at the same time, but I haven't painted whatever this is yet. I do know that I'm going to be starting off in either like Rebel or Art Rage, and then maybe moving on to something else. It kind of depends. That's sort of my MO lately is I'll start somewhere and end up, whatever I might need later on, or if I get a wild idea, I can open up another program and make something happen. But more importantly than that, there are going to be 6 tips that I have for you, and they work with any painting program. In fact, they even work without a painting program. You can use this on your traditional art as well, and it's going to kind of have the same effect. So first off, whenever we talk about like more dynamic or expressive paintings, what do we mean? Now, everyone kind of has a different, a different definition. And that's kind of what makes art subjective, right? Is we have these set terms, but the definitions can vary from artist to artist. Someone can think something is dynamic, while someone else thinks it might be kind of tropey or whatever, right? So basically, whenever I say dynamic or expressive paintings, what I mean is wild brushwork that come together to make something kind of greater than the sum of its parts, right? Kind of the Gestalt theory of whenever you look at it up close, it looks a little bit chaotic. It looks like a bunch of nonsense, but then you back up, John Singer Sargent would call it the 9-foot rule. Just because, from 9 feet away, everything's going to kind of blend together. And that's about the average viewing distance at a museum, at an art museum. So with digital art, it's a little bit different. Everyone has screens. We have them like right up to our faces, but you can still apply these same dynamics as far as like the crazier brushwork and using this idea of impressionism, of putting stuff down to elicit an emotion, and also basic shapes and things like that will all come together. So actually, some of these tips may help define what we mean by expressive brushwork. But like I said, this is going to work for everything. This works for everything from GIMP to like Procreate, Infinite Painter, Clip Studio Paint, Rebel, Art Rage. Doesn't matter. I will say before we get too far into it that usually programs that have brush packs that mimic traditional media, so let's say has like filbert brushes or chalk brushes or, just a variety of brushes that have a bunch of different brush tips and textures, is going to be a little bit easier to do these things with. Now, you can still use these actual, tips with just a hard and soft round brush, and you're still going to get more dynamic paintings. It is what it is. So that's why I wanted to keep these kind of like software agnostic, right? They kind of exist on their own. You don't need a specific piece of software or a specific brush pack to do this stuff with. You can just kind of do it on your own terms, in your own method, and you're going to see some results. So let's dig in. Let's get into what these 6 tips might be. So number 1 is actually, pound for pound, probably the most important one, because it's going to break you out of some habits, okay? Tip number 1, use bigger brushes. Use a brush that's a little too big for what you're trying to do. What this is going to do is this kind of resets your brain about what's important. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about details and stuff later, but the bigger the brush, probably the better, because you can't make these tiny little brush strokes. They have to be big swashes of brush movement. You know what I mean? Like you have to move the brush around to move that much paint around or pixels or whatever. Make the brush bigger, because what you're going to do, one, it's going to make you zoom out as well. So you're automatically resetting your brain to look at the entire image as an image instead of as details. And like I said, in fact, the next tip has to do with details, but using the bigger brush sets you up for success on this method. So let's say you like block in stuff using like a size 30 or 40 brush or whatever. Try a size 70 brush and see what happens. Even a size 80 brush. It might feel a little unwieldy whenever you first get going. But what this is going to do is make sure that you're going to be blocking in your big stuff first, worrying about your composition, kind of how, if you're working like directly in color, how are these colors mixing together on a big global scale. So actually you want to use bigger brushes. The whole idea of making, just finished paintings, whether you're a hobbyist or a professional or whatever, is this idea of working big to small. Do that with your brushes as well. Not just all the other stuff, not just composition or shapes or, visual library or whatever. Work big to small as far as your brushes, but always go a little bit above where you're comfortable, right? Because it's going to force you to make different brush movements. You're going to have to try to quote unquote stay within the lines if you work that way. Just go ahead and try that. You're going to be kind of impressed with how much that changes things. Even just changing the size of your brush whenever you're working can actually do a whole lot to kind of kickstart either different ideas or different methods that you can try. And it's going to make your work more dynamic just by the very nature of changing the way you think about making art. So number 2, this one is actually part of that use bigger brushes idea. But number 2, shapes are more important than details. Whenever you're working bigger, whenever you're working in a more expressive, impressionistic style, the shapes, your silhouettes, I'm talking circles, triangles, squares. This even goes into like shadow shapes. So like, it was one of my favorite kind of things that I do that really simplify and kind of put me on the right track is my shadow shapes for under the eyeballs, kind of where the eye sockets are on a skull, and also under the nose are triangles. I just always remember, hey, I need to make some sort of triangle or like weird prism that has sharp edges, but it's a very geometric shape. Also the head, it's kind of on the Loomis method. It's based off a circle anyway. So you start implementing some of those circles and things like that. But balancing these big shapes will actually allow you to detail stuff easier as well whenever you start getting more into the nitty gritty, as long as you stay within your shape. So it's way easier to paint an expressive square than it is an expressive like spaceship. Do you know what I mean? If you're thinking of it as a shape, just a shape, you're more likely to let loose a little more. Because everyone can kind of paint a square or a rectangle or whatever, right? So how do you make that shape look interesting? Do you refine some of the edges? Do you smudge it a little bit? Do you work a little bit bigger with a textured brush? What look is it going to give you? Try that out, because I think, one, it's helping you simplify your image making. But if you look at the masters, if you look at Anders Zorn, if you look at Degas, if you look at John Singer Sargent, a lot of their stuff is very graphical. It's very shape based, where you can clearly see silhouettes of a person or a jacket or a dancer, or, Caravaggio did it as well. Especially Caravaggio. He is the master of light for a reason, because his light and shadow all broke into very basic, primitive shapes. And if you stick with that, it's going to allow you to be a little bit more expressive and wild in your brushwork, because if it's within that silhouette of the shape, you can kind of do whatever you want. And it's sort of freeing. It makes it more fun. It makes it more exciting. And if you're having more fun and being more excited, you're going to make cooler looking work. That's just how it is. But yeah, shapes are more important than details. All right, so here's number 3. This is the one that people are going to be like, oh, I have to use a certain program to get a certain brush, to get a certain look, to get a certain deal. And to be completely honest with you, there is some truth to that. You're going to find more painterly brushes that mimic more traditional style media in something like a Rebel or an Art Rage or even like PaintStorm Studio. Now, Clip and Photoshop and Krita also have great brush packs that can mimic this type of stuff. So no matter what your, pick your poison, no matter what your preferred method, there are going to be brushes that mimic more traditional style stuff. But basically what the rule is texture brushes are great to add variety. So whenever you talk about something that's dynamic or, very emotional, emotion driven, you have to have contrast. There has to be something drastic that happens. Now, whether that's light versus dark or like thin versus thick or, big versus small, or texture brush versus no texture. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of these things come together as far as contrast. A lot of times when you hear contrast, you may think of like the color wheel and complementary colors, and you may go that route. And that's definitely a great form of contrast. But you have to think of contrast for everything. It's a great way to keep track of what your subject is. It's a great way to keep track of what your focal point is, because you can change what texture is on something. Is everything in the background hazy? Is it softer? You know what I mean? Is it kind of out of focus? A very Frank Frazetta way of working. And I'll tell you, Frank Frazetta, pretty dynamic. You know what I mean? His stuff looks pretty good, pretty emotional. You know what I mean? So you can see this no matter who you're studying, as far as like master studies and stuff. You're going to notice there's a big contrast in the type of texture that they use. Now, I would say every single painting program has like a hard round, a soft round, and then probably some form of chalk brush, like something that has a little bit of like grizzle or texture, or almost looks a little like sandpaper or something like that. You know what I mean? It's just not a perfectly square or perfectly circular brush. It probably has a weird edge, or it has like different opacities at different parts of the brush. That would be all you would need. Just one brush like that, and then a hard round and a soft round, and you have everything you need. So yes, while it is true, if you have Art Rage, if you have Rebel, if you have, the Memi Leo brush pack for Krita, if you have these things that are built to add a lot of really thick brush strokes and really expressive variety to your brushes, it will be easier. It will be easier to find that variety. But you can still do it with just 3 brushes. You could do this in MS Paint for all I care. You know what I'm saying? If it has an airbrush and a hard round brush and some sort of weird texture thing, you're good to go. Craig Mullins is a genius at that. Back whenever he would do, Halo 2 art, this was during the early days of digital art. He would just use his mouse, and he would basically use like 3 or 4 brushes, and that's it. And he made some of the most beautiful, stunning looking work I've ever seen. So yeah, don't think that you need 8 million brushes to make this happen. Just remember, what texture are you using? Is it harder? Is it softer? Does it have a little bit of grit to it? And make those decisions that way. So yeah, just texture brushes, great way to add variety. They're automatically, as long as you juggle those and balance them well, you're going to have a pretty dynamic looking image. Now, number 4, on that same kind of thing as the texture brushes are great to add variety. Softer edges allow your harder edges to sing. So we talked about contrast a little bit, right? But did you know that a majority of your painting, whether it's a digital painting or whether it's a traditional piece, a vast majority of your edges should be softer edges? So whenever you have an image that has too many hard edges, you get something that looks very, very fake. It looks less dynamic, in my opinion. It looks a little bit more cardboard cutout. Do you know what I mean? Because if you have a sharp edge next to a sharp edge next to a sharp edge next to it, your eye is not going to know where to look. Eye follows contrast. So if you have a majority of your painting being softer edges. So not lost edges, but soft edges where you can still see an edge, but it's not razor sharp. Whenever you add those razor sharp edges, they're really going to pop off the canvas. And that's where you can do your focal point. You can actually draw people's eye a certain way. Really, really beautiful, interesting stuff you can do with this. But if you just keep in mind that a majority of your painting should be a little softer on the edges, you're in a good place. And it's funny, softer edges, you'll never guess where that comes from, using a bigger brush. If you use a bigger brush, the edges are going to kind of melt together a little bit. You're still going to see the edge, but it's going to be a little softer. They're going to kind of overlap a little bit runnier, a little bit, you know what I mean? So it's the same thing as oil painting. Whenever you put oil next to oil, the oils mingle, right? So you get this slightly softer diffusion of value of color, and they sort of blend in right at the edge, kind of softens both of them out. Now, let's say you go over that with, once everything's kind of dry and set, then you go over with like a ruler and like a razor blade type thing and make a super hard edge, a super sharp one. Man, it is going to be, it's like a superpower. It's going to draw people's eye there, but it's going to add contrast and make your piece more dynamic. So yeah, just keep in mind, softer edges are the way to go for more dynamic painting, but also just really for painting in general. Now the fifth one, this one's actually a lot of fun, and it's for that reason that it's on the list. When you start getting bored, whenever you're in your piece and let's say you got past the initial part where it's starting to make sense and you're like, oh man, I'm going to make this and it's going to be a barbarian and barbarian's going to be swinging an axe and all this other stuff. And then you get to the point to where you're like, oh, well, now it's going to be a bunch of rendering, a bunch of zooming in and a little like 4 and 5 pixel brushes. And, you know, I'm trying to detail something, or I'm going to go in and render and all that, you know, it starts becoming work. It starts becoming a job, and that joy kind of comes out of it. Whenever you feel that sensation, do something drastic. Now, what I like to do sometimes, I don't actually do it a lot unless it's on client work and I need to like rev up the engine and I need to like, okay, I need to come back into the image. I need to be laser focused. I need to do something drastic. So what you can do is start making new layers and mess with the blending modes. Do like a difference or exclusion blending mode and start adding stuff and see what happens. It's going to be super chaotic. You're going to freak out whenever you first see it, but look at it and see if it's usable. See if you can do something with it. So one that's really, really fun to do, and what I like to do, is if you make a cloned, like a merged copy of your work, and then put it on, let's say, difference or exclusion or multiply or overlay or do something like that for the topmost layer, and then drop the opacity to about 20%, then rotate it. So either flip it or like flip the not the whole canvas, but just that one layer. What it's going to do is it's going to add some really buck wild variety. You're going to be like, whoa, what's these weird shapes and stuff's overlapping and that's weird. And oh my goodness. This is also a technique I learned from Craig Mullins. Whenever you do that, your brain has to like, whoa, what's going on? And it's going to add a little bit of that juice. You're going to get that excitement back. And then you're going to be like, well, wait, maybe I can work with this. I like that texture this added right here, and I like that one right there. So let me go ahead and use either a clipping mask or just erase what I don't need and keep what I do need to make for a more interesting image. This is basically that whole idea of photo bashing. This is where photo bashing kind of invented itself. Is if you needed variety, if you needed some detail, if you needed something, you could bring in a stock image or a royalty-free image or whatever. Let's say you work at a studio and you had some licenses. You had some like big archives of like palm trees or mountains or whatever. You would bring that in. You would set to like softer or overlay or lighten or kind of whatever blending mode. Then you would like blend it in and then you would paint over top of it. That's just how it works. Do the same thing, but with your own painting. If you already have stuff on the canvas, if you already have your own painting, use it to your advantage. It's yours. You can do whatever you want to it, right? So add a little bit of chaos when you start getting bored, and I guarantee it's going to shake you out of whatever cobwebs you're in. You're going to get you're going to get some pretty wild results, but it's going to make for a really interesting problem-solving exercise, and it's going to help build your confidence because you're going to be put into a position where you don't know what to do. Oh God, how do I fix this? How do I change this? How do I make this work? And the more you do that, the less your bog standard everyday like art problems are going to be problems anymore, because you know how to make it work. Like you have a picture of whatever and it got overlaid over this image and you have to somehow make it work. You can do it. You know, you're putting in the miles, you're putting in that work, and you're leveling up your own problem solving, which is going to make for more dynamic images as well. So yeah, add a little bit of chaos, you know, get a little crazy with it. All right, and the final one, this one's kind of a gimme. This one's a little bit of a gimme. It's related to all of them, but it's absolutely true. Have fun. That's it. Have fun. The amount of fun you have, the result of your painting is equal to the amount of fun that you're having. I promise. If you're excited about painting it, if you're in there and you're working and new things are happening, you're like, what is this? What? You're like riding the lightning, you know, like things are happening and you're throwing stuff at the screen and it's kind of working, but kind of not. You're kind of messing with it. Whoa, man, what's going on? You're going to make something that's way out of your wheelhouse, way more dynamic. It's going to fry your brain. It's almost going to be like overstimulating with how intense it's going to be. And I know it sounds dramatic, but trust me, if you're using bigger brushes and softer edges and texture brushes and you get some crazy hard edges and do the multiply trick and do all this other stuff, you're going to have a wild looking image. So how do you bring that to final? How do you get that portfolio ready? It's a fun learning experience. It's a fun way to work. I actually can't work every time like that because sometimes it's too much. It's too much for my brain to handle. I have to be amped up on like Monster energy drinks and like, you know what I mean? I have to be going for it, listening to crazy heavy metal or whatever. And like, I have to be in the zone. And then it's almost like you're looking into the Matrix. You're like trying to figure this out and piece it together. And it's super liberating. It's very, very fun. It's a great way to work. If you build up your endurance that way, there's not a problem that's going to come across your desk that you won't be able to solve. It's just going to make more dynamic. It's going to make your artwork more dynamic. It's going to make you more dynamic because you can literally roll with the punches. Whatever's going on, hey, I can change, I can adapt, I can manipulate, and then make it work. So you are now more dynamic. All right. You're more expressive. You're able to tell that story. You're able to go out there and put something on the canvas that people are going to look at and be like, whoa, man, that's wild. Like, how'd you even think of that? You know, write it out. You'll see. You'll see. But those are my 6 right there. Those are some 6, tips for you that, whenever you're working on digital art, traditional art, whatever, if you're falling into a rut, you feel like your stuff's a little stale, a little boring, just, throw a baseball bat in the glass house. You know what I mean? Just shatter it, man. Just whatever. Because, another thing you have to think about, let's say you try that and you do this one and it kind of quote unquote ruined the image or whatever. The image was probably kind of ruined anyway if you were getting bored and it looked really stale. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it kind of ran out of gas. So would you just be like rendering a piece for 10.5 hours that wasn't worth it? It's something to think about. It's something I've thought about a lot recently. Is like, hey man, if this ain't working, I'm just going to go whole hog, buck wild. Like, what's going to happen? Let's just do it, man. I'm here to have fun. This ain't fun. Let's make it fun. Done. It's going to make more dynamic work. I promise you, it's going to do it. It does take a little bit of practice. It does take a little getting used to, but get some order from that chaos. Go in, drop a grenade on the bridge while you're still standing on it and see what happens. YOLO, right? We only live once. So yeah, push yourself, push your artwork to that next level of dynamicism, of energy, of impressionism, of expressiveness by doing some of these tips. And I think you're going to be very well pleased. So if you need a copy of Rebel, or also like Clip Studio Paint, which we mentioned both of those in this episode, I got a link down in the description below. If you grab one of those from my link, it does help support the channel, and I appreciate you very much. And let's say you need some brushes. You don't got any, you just got your first digital art program or whatever, and you need some free brushes. You can head over to my website, www.wesgardner.art. I got brush packs, I got online courses, I got assets and tutorials and gradient maps and all kinds of wackiness that you can get to level up your art as well. So that's it for me. Hope you guys are having a great day, great time. The weather is finally getting colder, which I appreciate. I'm a big fan of cold weather. I love it. You can always put on more clothes. You know what I mean? But that's my time. Hope you guys are going out there making some cool art, making it more dynamic and expressive than ever. 2025 is going to be our year, y'all. I promise you. All right. That's it for me. I'm Wes. You guys are awesome, and we'll see you next time. Peace.